Imagine turning on an oversight hearing expecting routine political back and forth, and instead watching a moment that stops the entire room cold. That's exactly what happened when Congressman ThomasMassie confronted KashPatel with a line of questioning so direct, so unflinching, that even seasoned observers felt the temperature shift. If you're watching this, stay with me, because the deeper we go, the clearer the stakes become.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, you've seen most of the files, who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself? You replied, according to the transcript, there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information, and we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of two different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein, and if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file, and I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the pipe bomb investigation January 6th, and have you made any progress on the motive of the Las Vegas shooter?
As to the first, it's an ongoing investigation, and we have made progress. As to the second, sir, I'll have to get back to you.
Now, what makes this exchange different from typical oversight drama? It isn't grandstanding. It isn't theatre. What we see is something far more unsettling, and far more important. Massie isn't pointing to speculation, he's pointing to federal documents, victim statements, and years of records surrounding one of the most widely discussed criminal cases of the last 2 decades. And what he reveals raises questions that demand answers from institutions charged with delivering justice. Massie starts by placing articles and court filings into the record. Not for shock value, but to establish a trail, one the federal government itself acknowledges. That trail spans victims, powerful individuals, international connections, and thousands of pages of federal files that have never been fully released. Why does that matter? Because whenever a case intersects with influence, whether political, financial, or intelligence-related, transparency isn't optional. It's the only safeguard the public has. Massie's core question is deceptively simple. Why were victim-reported names in FBI files never pursued? He points out that victims provided statements. The FBI documented them. FD 302 forms exist. The accounts are real, on paper, in official case files. Yet KashPatel, speaking as a senior figure in federal investigative leadership, maintains publicly that there is no credible information indicating anyone besides Epstein himself harmed victims. And that's exactly where Massie presses in. If the information is already in the FBI's own records, how can it be dismissed as non-credible? How can it be ignored? And how can no investigation exist into the individual's victims named? Massie asks Patel directly. Were those individuals investigated? Were those leads followed? Was any forward motion ever taken? Patel's answer is that nothing new has been brought to him that would justify new action. But for Massie, and for anyone listening, that answer doesn't resolve anything. It creates a contradiction. If the FBI already has names and statements, then the issue isn't a lack of new information. The issue is a lack of follow-through on old information. And that raises an even more troubling possibility, that critical leads were simply allowed to sit, untouched. Massie then highlights another tension. Patel has previously testified that he has reviewed most of the case files. But in this hearing, he says he hasn't reviewed key documents containing victim statements. It's impossible not to notice the contradiction. How can someone responsible for oversight of a highly sensitive investigation rely on summaries instead of reading the primary documents himself, especially when those summaries appear to conflict with victim accounts? For anyone watching, this is where the hearing shifts from procedural to profound. We are not just watching Congress question a federal official. We are watching an institutional blind spot being exposed in real time. Then comes another carefully directed question. Has Patel reviewed any intelligence-related files connected to the case? Patel avoids speculation, speaks only for the FBI, and won't comment on what other agencies may hold. The hesitation is palpable. And in a case with multinational links, high-profile connections, and years of unanswered questions, viewers are left wondering, why isn't this clearer? Why isn't this more transparent? Another moment lands heavily when Massie asks whether Patel has met with victims or will personally do so. Patel says the FBI will meet with anyone who has new information, but stops short of committing to meet victims himself. For many observers, that moment reinforces a perception that leaders too often prioritize the optics of the institution rather than the lived experiences of the individuals harmed. Then Massie turns to document releases. He points out that on the very day he introduced a petition demanding federal files be released, documents suddenly appeared, so quickly, in fact, that victims' names were not properly redacted. That isn't just a bureaucratic slip. It's careless. It's dangerous. It treats victims as afterthoughts in a race to manage public perception. Patel distances himself from the timing, but the problem remains. When trauma survivors' privacy is jeopardized by the very agencies meant to protect them, trust fractures. And that's the underlying theme of the entire exchange: trust. Trust in institutions. Trust in accountability. Trust that when victims speak, someone listens and acts. Massie's final series of questions broaden the lens. Whether the topic is Epstein, January 6, Las Vegas, or any other high-profile investigation, the public expects clarity and consistency. But in case after case, what they see instead are gaps. Gaps between what agencies promise and what they deliver, gaps between public statements and private documents, gaps between accountability and avoidance. This hearing doesn't answer all those questions. It doesn't claim to. Instead, it exposes the tension between federal agencies' assurances and the public's expectations. It reveals the distance between what the FBI has said and what the documents show. And most importantly, it shows how critical oversight becomes when the truth risks being buried under bureaucracy. Because justice doesn't come from reassurances. It comes from documentation, investigation, and action. Massie's questioning brings those contradictions into full view, and the fact that this exchange even had to happen tells us something bigger about the state of institutional accountability in America. If you want deeper, fact-based political analysis that explores how power really operates, that digs into why oversight matters, and that refuses to look away from uncomfortable truths, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because conversations like this shape how justice is pursued and how institutions earn, or lose, the trust of the people they serve. Before you go, drop a comment below. What moment in this hearing stood out most to you? What questions do you believe still need answers? And do you think transparency is possible when investigations involve influential individuals? Your voice matters here. Let's talk about it. And as always, like, subscribe, and share this video if you believe accountability is not optional. It's essential.